Now, though you were doing more orchestral work, your experimental sound became, you could say, even crazier. We're going to be playing a suite from Naked Tango, The Rapture, Whispers in the Dark, and Flesh and Bone. Now, Naked Tango, you use these, again, Latin rhythms, but very perverted. And in The Rapture, it's a very spare use of piano and horns, which signify the coming of the four horsemen. And in Flesh and Bone, you used a lot of sound effects, cicadas. Did you, when you approached these scores, did you ever say, how can I go far out with this?
I don't know that you say, how can I go far out, as much as how can I make this compelling drama, and how can I do this in a way that's interesting and fun and perhaps is, kind of uncharted territory. I mean, I keep thinking that sound is a pretty wide open field. What it is, how does sound turn into composition? Is sound composition? I guess these are conversations people could have and say yes or no to. But I guess in the case of a lot of these, particularly Flesh and Bone, the process starts off with a lot of improvisation, with color, and with the players I've worked with, I guess, as far back as Reckless, a guy named Rick Cox, who does amazing things with guitars, prepared guitars, George Deering, a guitarist that I've worked with forever, Michael Fisher, a percussionist. And, sometimes I get together with these people and just mess around with instruments. Oftentimes, just to inspire myself, I'll go to music stores or, stores that you can find kind of eccentric musical instruments, buy them, and just start improvising on them. And a lot of times when my players come into studios, they have new instruments that they'll just want to play, not because they necessarily should work with the movie we're working on, but because they're interested in the sound coming out of them, and they're new instruments to these players. And oftentimes that kind of enthusiasm can just translate into incredible kind of dramatic choices. So again, it's not necessarily very much thought through as much as here I am. Here's a moment in time where I have blank space that has to be filled up with music, and how can I do that? And how can I involve my musicians, my players, and encourage their creative input and do some things that haven't been done before? Because why not? I think in the end, I don't want to imitate, not because I don't want to, but because I just can't. So I get together with my guys, and we just mess around. And if you're smart, you can look at the things that people do and say, yeah, that's great, and exploit them in the best possible of ways.
And again, you're really one of the first composers to successfully incorporate just pure sound effects and make the musical. Again, in The Rapture, you have typewriters, you've got people whispering, and it's a very, very creepy approach, very effective for that film.
Yeah, and again, it's asking oneself what's innately dramatic, what's compelling dramatically, and if whispers are, then whispers are. If they're not, they're not. It's either interesting or it's pretentious, and it's up to me, the composer, and I guess also the director, to either buy into this or not buy into it. So a lot of it is trial and error. For every hour of work, maybe 55 minutes is thrown out, but the 5 minutes that remains oftentimes is fairly unique.
Were you worried that it was going to get too weird for the studios?
I don't think so, because most of these movies were just so left of center anyway, and they were very much represented by the directors and the creative people involved more than they were by the studios. I'm trying to think if there were any movies that I had issues with studios. I think when I did Unstrung Heroes, there were some issues with my main title, which had to be rewritten because it was, a little too detuned or something. But typically, you try to work with your director because that's the creative force, and then it becomes his or her fight with the studio.
Let's listen to Tom Newman's experimental approach to Naked Tango, The Rapture, One more time. Let's listen to Tom Newman's experimental approach to Naked Tango, The Rapture, Whispers in the Dark, and Flesh and Bone. When we return to On the Score at Film Music Radio, Thomas Newman redefines the sound of America.